Okay, welcome folks. We're still getting a lot of people joining. I'm going to post the agenda one more time before we jump in. We have more than 40 people, so we often keep folks on mute all, but I have to say VMC is usually one of our more quiet site meetings, so I'm going to leave it that you guys can unmute yourselves. If you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Additionally, you can put anything you want in the chat, and either Zeb or myself will address it when we get a chance. And please don't message it directly to either myself or Zeb unless there's some reason that it needs to be private, just because sometimes we'll miss things in the flow of the chat moving if they're messaged to one of us. So for the agenda today, we have some updates on telework and remote work, CEMA training coming up on the EOD process and EOD investigations. We'll have an update on the nursing arbitration. Update on the county budget and looking ahead. Then we'll have a bit of a base touch on, I've had some folks reach out in the last couple of weeks with the increased work on DSWs with some of the increased number of vaccine. People are recapping on vacation, so we'll discuss that again and remind folks where we landed on that with the county back at the beginning of COVID. And then some brief updates at the end on just CEMA's political efforts lately with the SBLC, and then an update on our third rep position. So it's quite a lot on the budget today, but I think on the agenda today, but I think some of these things will go fairly quickly. So we'll go ahead and jump in. So first thing on here is on telework and remote work. At a lot of our sites, we've had folks reaching out quite a bit, I would say, over the last month. Kind of wondering what the future of telework and or remote work are going to be within the county. What we've seen is that there's not been really any focused direction as of yet from ESA or the CEO's office. As everyone will recall, we've been expecting really since about this time last year, some kind of updated, policy for telework, some new procedure guidelines taking into account, where we're at and current COVID and post-COVID world, and that has not yet come out from ESA. We actually have a meeting later this week, labor relations and ESA, so we might expect to see something there, and if we do, we're turning around. But in the absence of that, we're hearing a couple different things from various sites, and that's that there's been some discussion from the CEO's office that they're generally going to be targeting kind of the June timeframe to start trying to get folks back in who can be back into the office. That's going to be overly optimistic in some areas. This has also been a discussion point at the various committee levels, whether it's public safety justice or health and hospital, and as well as just committees at various, agencies to look at policies for return to work and shared space and so forth. So that work's kind of going, but not in any real structured or guided way by ESA. And what I want to let folks know is that we've had some preliminary conversations about this, and kind of the questions that we've been getting from members fall into basically two categories, I would say. One question being, what level of telework are we going to expect to continue? And then the second one is the county going to have any possibility or allowance for remote work moving into the future as we're seeing other industry trends change and move towards remote work. So a quick definition on how those two things differ. So telework, according to the county, would be you're working from home either all the time or some of the time, but you're available if needed to come into the office and to be in within about 2 hours of being noticed that you have to come in. I think the technical definition is that you have to be within the county within 2 hours. And with Bay Area traffic, that could mean you're still substantially far away from wherever your work site is. But basically, the idea is that you're within range to come in if needed. And then there's remote work, right? So remote work would be you're working somewhere distant to that, right? You're more than 2 hours away from your work site. You're working from Tahoe, you're working from San Diego, you're working from a different state, right? I think we all likely know a couple folks, and I know a handful of folks in SEMA who have been kind of on the download doing remote work, kind of under the radar, during COVID, and just not calling any attention to it. I'll continue to advise if you're in that position and not call any attention to it. But generally, what we've heard back from the county is that it's going to be very unlikely that they want to consider remote work, particularly work outside the state in the future. And there's a couple reasons that that's a priority for the county, why they wouldn't want to approve that. And then I'll also hit a couple of reasons why it's a potential concern on CEMA's end as well, and just potential, you know. So the reasons the county is going to be generally resistant to remote work are that to have folks work outside the state, you need to, one, encumber some millions of dollars for every state you have employees in for both workers' comp and unemployment insurance. So it can get to be expensive to employ folks in other states. You're paying taxes and insurance in those states as well then. So it increases, the administrative burden. So one, there's going to be some resistance on that front. And then two, I think the other major concern from the county being that they see now in a way they haven't previously, the importance of having that maybe deployed as a DSW worker that they've diligently inserted into everyone's job description over the last 10 or 20 years, right? That's actually been extremely important to the county, and they want to be able to continue to leverage their staff as disaster service workers to address whatever, perils confront the county in the future, right? I would say those are likely their two main priorities. On CEMA's end, one thing we would potentially be concerned about in a remote work future is kind of what we're seeing with other industry trends as, tech, for example, or the corporate world moves towards remote work. What we see is that individualized pay scales come out, right? So that your pay is going to be, tiered in some way to what the cost of living is in your area. We see this in other areas of government as well. For example, the federal government, if you're working for a federal agency, your pay will often be tied in some way to what office you're working out of. See this in the military, for example, right? Housing stipend is very tied towards where you're going to be living if you're an officer. And I think we all know that, living here in the South Bay with one of the highest cost of livings in, the country, let alone the world, our salaries are also quite a bit higher than what you'd see elsewhere in the country. So it would create a potential concern for us for the county to, one, start to question and push back and use that as a leverage, in future negotiations to try and bargain salaries down, for example, or not increase them if we had folks remote working. And then secondarily, there's something to be said for, a lot of people, work here in the county, for the sense and the sense of mission and public service, and that if you don't live in the county to some degree, you don't have much skin in the game. And then, the taxpayer dollars that pay for our salaries aren't then circulated back through that same community, right? That the community's sending money to be spent elsewhere. So it could create some potential, pushback on during future negotiations. So that's the general kind of response we've heard on remote work. We have some executives over some agencies that we've spoken with about this who are interested in having folks be able to telework from further distant than 2 hours. People are going to be on basically permanent telework. From where we stand now, that's something CEMA likely can push for and will at least be a topic of conversation. I think it very unlikely, though, that the county contemplates having folks live outside the state and continue to work as of right now. The exception, the point of frustration, and I know we have, this is frequent, for example, in our folks who do epic work, because there's so many contractors over there that you work side by side with. A lot of those difficulties aren't there when you're employing a contractor who's working remotely out of state because they're functioning as their own little business, right? So they take care of all those taxes and regulatory issues on their end, and it doesn't become a burden for the county. That's somewhat frustrating, but that's likely where we see this going as we move towards June. At some point, the county will need to come out with, an updated telework, remote work, et cetera, all-encompassing policy. And that won't be an extremely quick process, because as a countywide policy, it's going to have to go through every union, right? And that's going to be a somewhat laborious process. So as soon as we hear anything on that, we will keep folks involved and, survey everyone to get a sense of what their priorities are, what CEMA's priorities should be in responding to whatever that policy is. Zeb, anything you'd like to add on that topic or any questions from members you can put in chat?
Yeah, so let me just expound a little bit on that. Telework, remote work, Adam very clearly delineated the difference between the two. I have received, now it's upwards of 30, it's approaching 40 emails of CEMA members responding to our court notification which is that in the court, we were able to negotiate an agreement where members who want to can work permanently from home in a pilot program for 6 months. Of course, it depends on the nature of the work. Only specific classifications were approved. Hopefully, that's a direction that the county goes. When I say hopefully, I mean classifications that it makes sense. Obviously, if you're a fleet mechanic, you can't telework. Your job is to swing a wrench and change a transmission, right? You can't do that remotely. But there are many positions, especially in CEMA's ranks, that can be done remotely. So just as a reminder to all of you, unfortunately, you cannot apply for the court program being an employee of the county. However, it is our hope that at some point, something similar, if not better than that agreement, will come forth in the county. So that's the only thing I wanted to add, is that I think the court's a little bit ahead of us in this circumstance, whereas normally the county leads the way in this type of agreement. And we went in the county. The county, not only was CEMA the first to get telework in the county of any union, but we were well ahead of other local governmental employers going back about 8-9 years. And then very slowly, the court adapted. 6 years ago, they said, no, more sternly than that. You're not going to get a contract if you keep harping on this telework business. Then 5.5 years ago, they said, okay, 1 day a week for specific classifications. Then this most recent in 2019 contract for the court, they said 2 days a week for specific classifications. And now there's a complete 180 where they actually came to us and said, we're interested in mandating classifications being telework. So a complete switcheroo on the, that's a technical labor term on it, on the courts. And also for those of you that recall the CEMA updates from 9-10 years ago, while we got along well with Mr. Luc Leong, if you remember, initially his response was over my dead body for telework. And now obviously the county's just in a very, very different place. So yeah, sorry to walk down memory lane there, but go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, any questions from members on this? Feel free to unmute yourself or drop something in chat. And just as a quick note, folks that aren't familiar with it, the court is funded substantially different than county positions are, where it's not funded from local property tax revenue and sales tax, et cetera. It gets its funding from Sacramento. So it doesn't have that same kind of tying with being funded by the community they're serving sort of mechanic that we have here, providing county services. Okay, well, if anyone's mulling over a question on this, happy to come back to it. Next, oh, go ahead.
Hi, this is Anna. I have a question.
Hey, Anna, go ahead.
Hey, Adam. Hey, Deb. Is the county looking at balancing this with the traffic and the impact on the environment and all that? Do you know?
Yeah, we have other departments that have been asked. I'm actually not sure if this applies to many folks at VMC, but folks who are asked to, tabulate how many miles they're saving from time spent on the road each day they're teleworking, for example, for, reporting to the board and et cetera. There is a theoretical savings, one to the community or benefit to the community, and two, a savings to the county by increasing telework. And yeah, that's definitely something the county's looking at. How much that'll factor into the final decision, I can't say. As far as on the savings front, it's a little hard to calculate exactly how significant those savings would be. One, because the major opportunity from savings from increased telework would be downsizing actual floor space that the county has in those buildings that we don't own. And that's not happened yet, right? If anything, the county's continuing to expand, right? We've seen Silver Creek continue to be built out over the pandemic. So no savings there from increased telework as of right now.
All right, thanks, Adam.
Sure. Question here from member in chat. What if you're a primary caregiver for a family member who needs you there a portion of the week? So part of what's been difficult, I think, and I have probably a half dozen folks at VMC who are in this position right now, which is that, over the last couple months, we've seen various departments start to ramp up the number of days folks are expected to be in the office, for example, where people have it's been on partial telework, or that we might have nurses rotating in or something like that in a given site. And as that's, started to be kind of slowly ramped up in the absence of direction from, the broader county, it's running into people who have, for example, been able to provide, care to a family member who needs to be at home during the pandemic, or they're on tertiary childcare duty for their kids, or whatever it may be. And there's kind of two options for folks who are in that situation. One is first to try to reach some agreement, unofficially with your department. Hey, these are my needs right now. Can we work around them? What can we do? And then secondarily, where that's not been successful, folks are ending up kind of either looking at FMLA or some kind of accommodation. Both of those systems are just not super well equipped to deal with the situation that was described there. The reason for that is that you have FMLA on the one hand, which does cover time that you may need off to care for family members. Generally under FMLA, you're not gonna, request FMLA and then get telework as an option. Telework can be an accommodation under ADA, right? I have some kind of disability, for example, I might be in a high risk category for COVID. So I need to work from home, right? That can be a reasonable request. And we've seen plenty of those be granted over, the last year. But ADA does not extend to caring for other members of your family. So that's just not going to be a successful ask generally. And so folks should be aware of that if they're in that situation and putting in for one of those. But generally your best bet is going to be, first try having a conversation with your department. I've been, like I said, involved in more than a dozen of these kind of cases at VMC alone over the last year. And we're successful in, I don't know, half of them maybe, and, finding some kind of solution that fits our members' needs. Definitely not all of them. And it's often going to depend to some degree on whether, whether it's stated or unstated, but that your senior leaders, think your telework is being effective or not. You're not always going to hear that answer necessarily, but my experience, that often kind of plays into it. So yeah, folks are welcome to reach out if that's impacting anyone. I would say first try to have a conversation about it. If you don't get anywhere, you can reach out to me if I'm your rep, or Zeb if you're in behavioral health and on this call, maybe. Okay. I'm going to jump into the next item we have on the agenda, which is upcoming CEMA training. This is something that we were asking for feedback from other site meetings over the last month. And we generally got feedback that it would be a beneficial training. So we're finishing putting it together right now, and we'll get it scheduled soon for folks, likely in the next month. And what this is, or the need that Zeb and I identified over kind of the last 6 months to a year, has been what seems like a somewhat substantial uptick in the amount of time that Zeb and I spend representing members in EOD investigations. And consequently, what that means is the number of EOD complaints being filed against folks in CEMA, right? I think people at VMC will be generally aware of EOD as a department, but for anyone who's not, I'll just explain it real quick. So EOD is the Equal Opportunity Division, and their charge is to kind of be an independent department functioning within the county that investigates allegations of discriminatory behavior by a county employee against a fellow county employee, where there's some nexus in a protected category. So it could be age, race, gender. Hey, Zeb, you're muted.
It could be against anybody. It doesn't need to be against a county employee.
Oh, okay. Yeah, or anyone. I haven't come across one with a member of the public, but okay. Yeah, if they investigate that. Yeah. So where there's some kind of nexus of a protected category, right? Something that the federal government through EEOC would care about. That's their general charge. And ostensibly, the idea is that they don't, report up to, labor relations, for example, right? So their job is to find just an independent, set of facts, and then turn those over to the county to say, here's what's happened. You guys decide what to do. That's EOD's charge, right? And while, I think it goes without saying that, myself, Zeb, and CEMA as a whole, absolutely want to ensure that there is no discriminatory behavior taking place on the part of anybody in the county against anyone else. In, I would say, the majority of cases that we end up representing, there's an element of substantial abusive process here as, employees file, EOD allegations against, folks in CEMA, for example, kind of as a method to increase the cost of doing business for trying to hold someone accountable on performance or because someone was written up. That's not every case, but it's a concerningly high number. And then it's just, unfortunately, this is not a process that most folks in CEMA have gone through, right? We don't spend, much of our time at all dealing with disciplinary issues, for example, in CEMA. Generally, it's easy to say that, most folks in CEMA are extremely professional, aren't getting in trouble at work. You've generally been promoted a couple times to be in the positions that you're in. So this is very often the first investigation that folks have been through. And unfortunately, because of the process, it's often quite long, can be quite stressful. You don't get an answer back for a year. Sometimes you get pulled in for multiple investigations. So just given that this is becoming an increasingly prevalent issue that confronts folks in CEMA, and generally in my experience, when folks reach out, the first conversation we have is trying to provide some perspective and ensure folks aren't, getting overly stressed and freaked out about it. We're putting together just kind of a general training on, this is the EOD process. This is what it looks like. These are best practices for what to do if you receive a notice like this. This is the representation that CEMA provides during this process, et cetera. So if that's something that folks are interested in attending, we'll have that scheduled within the next month or so. And for anyone who's not able to attend, we'll also have it up on YouTube like our other trainings these days. Zeb, anything you'd like to add on to that? You're muted again.
Okay. So just a couple of things. EOD, what we're looking at this training from a perspective of is not only to educate our members about the process itself, but also to advise in some ways as to what appropriate steps are. And then also even having that understanding is helpful. Just this morning, I had someone who emailed me and said, I just got a notice that, this is from TSS, I just got a notice that I was copied on that said a complaint I got 8 months ago was partially sustained. What does that mean? And all that happens is EO sends you a message that says, pursuant to complainant Joe Blow's complaint of November 2019 is partially sustained. And then a bunch of gobbledygook about who your managers are and stuff. So if you're just a normal person that hasn't been through the EO process many times or doesn't have a deep understanding of it, you're like, partially sustained, I don't know what that means. So there's 3 categories: sustained, partially sustained, and unsustained. Sustained means, broadly speaking, the allegations against you are accurate from EO's point of view, and the department will take appropriate corrective action. Partially sustained means some of it was not accurate, some of it was. And then unsustained means there's no evidence to support that whatever was alleged happened. And then there are varying levels of that. So it's a big educational piece too, to understand what the process is and kind of demystify it in a way. Then Adam, I wanted to cycle back to a couple of other questions that were asked about the telework.
Sure.
Before we move on to the next item. So to, I believe Hella, I hope I'm saying your name right, Hella, is telework permitted outside of the US if you need to care for a relative? So no, it is not, but telework is not permitted outside of this state, let alone outside of the US for SDI and workers' compensation reasons that Adam mentioned earlier, which is that, let's pretend, for example, you're working out of Montana. Then the county now has to pay Montana tax and insurance in case you injure yourself or something happens. And we're not equipped to do that. So you can't even work outside of the state, let alone outside of the country. There was another question about if it was there any waiting for people to be DSW? So this is William asking. I don't believe that one was answered. Is that correct, Adam?
From William, I'm scrolling up. Sorry, I was reading that.
Is it being considered for those who have been called into DSW and must arrive at locations, while those who are further are not required or prioritized, thus disincentivizing those to live closer to SEC? So no, the idea of remote working and teleworking is still not to get people to live outside of Santa Clara County. We understand people do, but it's in the interest of the board, and I think all of us as providers of service, to live as close to or in the community as possible. And we absolutely know that that's a priority in the board. Just as I think it was Lynn who brought this up, just as it was brought up that emissions and wear and tear on the roads are a priority for the board, it's also a priority that people, live, work, and play in the county. And so that we have some skin in the game as to the constituents we're providing services to. Yeah, exactly, William. We would be communicating in those. Oh, great. Thank you, Carlos. It's good that you're interested in that. Okay.
Then we got a question, and it's the next agenda item about the nursing arbitration update. So we have quite a number of folks on here. I think about double what we had last month. So I'll give folks the quick update that we had last month as well to catch folks up, and then just the brief update for this month, which is that, one, we're expecting the response back likely the beginning of May or sooner, so sometime between now and beginning of May from the arbitrator. And again, that's the decision back from the neutral third party, right, about whether the county violated the contract by refusing to pay the signing bonus to our nurses, right? That's the issue that we're arbitrating. What we let folks know last month is that while we were expecting a response from about by right now, the attorney representing the county on this case, Amy Logan, approached us and asked for an extension on submitting their piece of the final brief, which we ultimately agreed to. A little bit of what we discussed last month is that I think from CEMA's perspective, the county definitely dragged this process out further than it needed to be. I would generally say I feel like that was kind of from labor relations involvement, picking, the last possible date the arbitrator had available as the date, only one they were available for scheduling. And then the fact that we're even arbitrating this issue to begin with, which we think could have been resolved by just reading the contract language about a year ago when this issue first came up. That being said, CEMA had a good relationship with this attorney. She's been pretty reasonable as part of the county's bargaining team in the past. And the request came in because she has since departed working for the county. She was trying to hand everything off. And I felt like at the time, and I feel like now, that if we needed an extension because, I won the lottery and left and Zeb had to do the brief last minute, that she would have granted us that consideration, given our previous, or if I got COVID, who knows? For some reason we need an extension. Maybe it's a bad reason. But that she would have given us that consideration based on our previous history working with her. So we gave them a couple extra weeks. Unfortunately, that pushed back the timeline. So now we're expecting it likely by the beginning of May instead of by right now. Just as a reminder, though, what we've talked about previously is that our ask of the arbitrator was for, full restitution and payment of the lump sum bonus along with appropriate interest. So if we prevail on that, folks won't be monetarily harmed by us, granting the county a couple extra weeks to finish up their brief. That's where we're at right now. Hopefully we'll have good news for folks at the next site meeting.
And, good job summarizing that, Adam. And just so you all know, Adam did a brilliant job on the presentation to the arbitrator. Also, I don't want there to be any misunderstanding. Even though we're having these administrative delays right now, that's not because our case or position has weakened in any way. So I just want to make that clear, that the fact that there's this delay isn't because, we're worried about it or there's been some setback in terms of our argument. It's just a procedural delay.
Yeah. If anyone's looking for some light reading, we're happy to share the brief we put together, for some light reading before bed. I was pretty proud of it, where it ended up. I think it was well argued at the end. And after looking through the county's brief, you exchange copies once the arbitrator has both of them, so you don't cheat and read theirs before you finish yours. I'm still fairly confident in our position. We can't ever promise a specific result, but it feels 80 to 90% likelihood. I think we're going to prevail in this. So keep fingers crossed, everyone. I see Zeb posted the flyer for our PD event this week. Would you like to just plug that real quick, Zeb, before we move on with the agenda?
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you. So I'm posting it again. We have a meeting, and it's kind of short notice. It's this Wednesday. It's from 12 to noon. The PD event is bringing up why ethics matter. I don't know if you're familiar with Darylyn Swift. She's somewhat known locally as a great orator. So it really should be an interesting event. I'd like to invite all of you to join for that meeting. Of course, it's free of charge with the Zoom events. Unfortunately, because we're not meeting in person, that doesn't mean you get to have a delicious lunch, but you do get to join the event free of charge. So I would really encourage you all to attend. It's easy to do, noon to 1, and the invite information is on the PD. The file I just posted in chat, and that's tomorrow.
Great, thanks, Ed. Let me see. Next item we had on the agenda was an update on the county budget. So these have been getting briefer, right, over the last couple of months as there's not been much change. So we're just talking a little bit as well about, you know, what things look like looking ahead. So we continue to be, I would say, broadly in a better financial position right now than we expected to be 4 or 5 months ago for this point in time. And part of the reason for that, right, is the success of the VSIT program, better than expected news on the property rolls, as well as tax revenue, better than the predictions were from county's finance department last year. And that's been generally good for the county budget. And then finally, there is still about another $90 million structural deficit the county's not intending to make up by the end of the year, because they're expecting to be able to manage that through other increased revenues. So, you know, when we spoke, 3-4 months ago, we were expecting that there was going to be another round of cuts, and that these might be cuts that were hitting, actual filled positions in some substantial number before the end of the year. And that seems like it's not going to be happening now, right? Which is great news, right? We're still seeing in some departments, there continue to be what I would call, or what the county is calling, reorganizations that kind of end up in the elimination of positions. So they're not being pitched as like additional cuts per se, but there are still elimination of positions. We're seeing that, for example, in the assessor's office. We're seeing that in custody health, for example. And that's somewhat concerning. That's something CEMA is continuing to address. I have to say, I think most areas where that's happening, the bulk of positions being impacted are not CEMA positions, so much as we're hearing more on this kind of from RMPA and SEIU as a concern on their end, but still a concern on our end, particularly in the assessor's office. But broadly good news where we're at with the budget. And then secondarily, of course, with the latest piece of, COVID relief stimulus coming out of the federal government, $300 billion for state and local aid. And I think last number I heard on that was Santa Clara is expecting to see something on the order of a little more than 300 million from that. I don't think we've seen yet exactly how that's going to be apportioned, but I expect HHS is going to receive a substantial portion of it, as some of that money is set aside for COVID related reimbursements. That being said, the last piece of this is looking ahead. So one piece of advice that we had been giving consistently over the course of the last year, and kind of the financial upset, has been that folks should be aware of the potential negative impacts from accepting a transfer or promotion, going back on a probationary status during this period of budget cuts. And there's kind of two positions folks can be in there, right? One is if you haven't passed your initial probation yet, and the second is if you just be going on a subsequent probation, a 6-month one. I think we would still continue to advise, given the general uncertainty ahead, probably a bad idea to do anything to delay passing your first initial 9-month probation. Remember, transferring during that period resets it. You go back to day one and you have to complete your 9 months. That being said, what we've been saying now, I think the last couple months, is for anyone who is, delaying or considering a transfer or promotion, not wanting to be in probationary status for subsequent probation, I think it's unlikely, looking ahead in the next 6 months, that we're going to be cutting any substantial filled positions here in the county. That being said, it's hard to look much further ahead than that right now, right? The fiscal year is going to turn over. And frankly, it's just hard to say what next year is going to look like as of right now, once we get, very far into the year. There's a couple of reasons for that, right? There's some, potential concerns, that could impact the county's finances, for example. And I know Zeb's good with the numbers on this, but there's, a really concerning rate of mortgage and rent delinquency, kind of a bubble that's building up here in Santa Clara. And while the moratorium on eviction has been extended, at some point that's gonna come due, right? And folks are gonna be liable for all of that back mortgage and rent, right? Didn't go away. You're liable for it whenever the moratorium ends, and that could have potentially, right? We don't know, but that could have a negative impact on housing prices here as things kind of trickle up as a result. And of course, the attendant issues then, if folks end up on in a position where they need increased county services because they've been evicted, that kind of hits us on both sides. One, on the increased cost from providing services to our residents, and then two, on the back end, that we're getting less revenue. So there's a potential concern there. And just those kind of things make it hard to guess what next year is going to look like. The economy could continue to improve, and that would be great, but it could also not at the national level, and we'll have to wait and see. In HHS and VMC's case, there's a couple other complicating factors. VMC and HHS was broadly able to get through this year without, what could have been worse damage to positions here, partially as a result of the surplus that you guys ran the previous fiscal year that was able to be applied to this year, right? That same surplus is not going to exist for the coming year. Hopefully COVID reimbursement can help kind of plug that gap and get us through next year. But there's less of a cushion that was available for this last year to help kind of tide things over. So there's definitely still some question marks out there. But for the time being, we're in a good position, and I think we should all be thankful for that. Zeb, anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I wanted to add as well, since I see there's a fair number, at least a dozen TSS folks on the line here, that TSS presently has 140 funded vacancies, and they will be moving forward to hiring those starting now. I'm going to post in chat what those early positions are looking like. The network telecom technicians, the network engineers, BRM, so it's business relationship managers, and the senior, as well as management analysts, senior management analysts, and Epic systems analysts. So those are all being hired right now. So if you're a hiring manager, or you're someone who's interested in applying for one of those, keep your radar up and get your notices in at the county website so you're applying for those. And I also want to articulate that while I mentioned the term 140 funded vacancies, they're not purely vacant. So what I mean by that is some of the vacancies are currently being staffed by either extra help or, more commonly, provisional people. So bear that in mind, right? That as they hire, maybe you know or work with someone that's provisionally filling in as a network engineer, as an example, or one of these codes or others. And when it then gets posted full time, likely the provisional person will apply for it, but they may end up going back to their underlying code if they're not successful. So there could be some musical chairs going around here, but just be aware that, as Adam pointed out with the budget, because it appears rosier than we anticipated, don't get me wrong, we're not out of the woods here. This is still a bad budgetary time, right? But we're not looking at chopping off, not layoffs. We're looking at hiring to what is funded. and TSS already gave up some vacant funded positions, but now they're able to staff some of these ones that they've been neglecting for a long time.
And then on that, just one other quick point. We just recently approved an ad delete that'll be going through, I think, the next budget session for another handful of Epic Systems Administrator Analyst positions over at VHP. Right now, I think it's 4 or 5 of the journey level positions, but they're intending to add some senior ones as well, likely in the near future. For anyone for whom telework is a strong priority, I would just say VHP is continuing to expand right now. One of the few areas that's been able to consistently hire over the last year and is likely going to continue to hire as they kind of expand operations and take over the entire managed care insurance industry in the South Bay. I think it's generally a place, most folks in CEMA enjoy working, and it's likely going to be one of the areas with the most generous telework practice in the post-COVID environment. They have a strong desire to stay out as much as possible from the leadership level. So that's a priority. Folks should take a look at those positions over there. We generally plug it. Right now, Greg just asked if it's senior Epic Systems Analyst. So the ad delete we just approved was for 4 or 5 journey, the non-seniors. But in discussing with VHP, why aren't you doing a split between journey and senior with these? They said they're intending sometime in the near future to likely add some senior positions on top of those 4 journey level ones. They're kind of doing a fairly quick build out on this capability right now. So I don't have an exact timeline on that for you, but if you're in a senior position, I would just say keep an eye on it for the future. If you're in a journey level position, those will be coming up fairly soon.
And just as Adam pointed out quite adeptly earlier, is that we just have some significant back rent and mortgage payments that are due. The latest number, I don't like this number, and I'll explain why, is 43,000 families are at risk of eviction. The earlier number was about 29,000, so that is ballooned. But instead of the prior language shifted, it was 29,000 owe more than $4,000 in back rent or mortgage payments. And now they're saying 43,000 are at risk in our county. I don't understand. The article doesn't make clear what at risk means. So I'm uncomfortable with that language. The point being that a great number of households, families, somewhere north of 30,000 will not be able to come up with the money that they owe in June when the COVID relief expires. And that means that that means more properties, whether rental or regular properties, will be on the market, which will impact our tax roll, right? But it also means that now, as Adam pointed out, those people are drawing more on public services, assuming they stay local. Sometimes people flee to lower cost areas, but if you don't have any money, you're just out on the street, right? And that means social services, if there's any SSA people here, of course, VMC, it means medical services, behavioral health, all of that. So just bear that in mind. While there's rosy property appreciation, which gives us a tax roll increase, there's this looming economic and, more importantly, personal damage that's possibly in the future, likely in the future. I'd say it's greater than possibly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had a question earlier, I see, asking about is the county intentionally trying to drag out the arbitration process, and pointing out that having gotten this resolved would have been great for our nurses to use the bonus for COVID related expenses. And I would just say, it's often easy to think about the county kind of as a monolith, but at a decision level like this, the issue that we're dealing with in the arbitration, these are really more decisions being made kind of by individuals. And I don't think their priority in this case is trying to save the county money. I would kind of ascribe the other delays and reasons that we couldn't resolve this more to kind of, I think, what Zeb and I have described in the past is an ongoing frustration with maybe a culture in some parts of labor relations where they see their goal as not supporting, the county and, and making sure contracts are enforced, but rather trying to, find a win, whatever that win would be defined as in any given situation. You know, I think that was a lot of the frustration that we expressed, and the bargaining team expressed during negotiations, right? And why we, you know, were so often just, you know, we had to find resolutions to things away from the table, for example, right? Just that mentality of trying to win rather than actually solve problems. So it's just that I honestly don't think that was a decision that was made at a higher level to try to save the county money. I think it was a decision that was made at a fairly junior level, which unfortunately has a negative impact on Sema and, you know, our nurses, right? Let me see what we got next on the agenda here. Cap vacation accruals. This is something that we talked about a lot back at the beginning of COVID, and it's come back up in a few phone calls that I've had with some of our DSWs from VMC in the last week or so. So I just wanted to remind everyone of this issue and where it landed. So back during the initial kind of months of the pandemic, I think folks will recall one of our big priorities was to try to find some universal solution to people who were unable to take vacation, you know, what we could do to either increase their cap or give them a one-time cash out, et cetera. And that we were never able to find any universal solution on this with labor relations, which was, I know, extremely frustrating at the time. From our perspective, it seemed like a very low-hanging, easy ask at the time, given that so many folks in CEMA, I mean, I think this is just borne out for the last year. I've continued to put in such a tremendous amount of time deployed as DSWs, really making sure the counties continued to function through this crisis. And that, you know, while, you know, some other units where folks get overtime have done kind of gangbusters during this period, folks in CEMA have been doing this because they care about, you know, providing services to the public, right? Without any extra compensation. So felt like the vacation issue was low-hanging fruit, but we didn't get there on a universal solution. Instead, kind of the stance labor relations ended up taking is, you know, they'll agree to resolve individual cases that have merit rather than any omnibus solution. So I've heard from some folks that with, I think that unexpectedly high delivery of vaccines that we got recently, folks are being asked to put in extra time and aren't being able to take time off. Kind of just to remind everyone that the criteria that ESA will want to vet before they agree to any individual solution for anyone who's vacation capped in that situation is that, one, if you were eligible to cash out vacation back in January, you applied in January, got it cashed out in February, that you did so. If you forgot to or neglected to, they're not going to care. And our experience in this last year is they're going to be like, too bad we had a system to, you know, help you avoid this situation and you didn't take advantage of it. So we're not going to, you know, find some extra contract solution. And then secondarily, that your boss is actually saying, I will not approve you for time off if you ask. If your boss says, I would approve Zeb for time off if he asked, he's just, you know, a dedicated son of a gun who's going to come in no matter what I tell him to do. So, you know, that's where we're at. And then ESA is going to say, too bad, we're not going to find a solution. But if you meet both those criteria, we've been able to find, you know, other solutions to deal with the vacation cap issue. So if anyone here is in that situation, can reach out and let us know, and hopefully we'll be able to resolve something. We have in, like I said, a handful of cases, not in every single one though. And I think it not unlikely, given what I've heard from members, that, you know, if we continue to be in, you know, situation coming forward in future years where, you know, we have some significant DSW force continuing to be deployed, doesn't seem like an unfeasible situation. You know, this is something that might need to be addressed with, you know, contract language in future negotiations. And that's something that we've heard a lot of support from the board on, is that, you know, they don't want to continue to have this not tuned for purpose system where the county is being run with DSWs that, you know, are just doing something they weren't hired to do with very little support and infrastructure around that, right? So it's maybe something that we continue to address in the future negotiations. Okay, let me see, last item I think we had on the agenda, or no, two more. We have Sema Politics and the SBLC. So this is brief. I don't think we have her on the call here today. She's not usually at the VMC one, but wanted to say congratulations to Dolores Morales, our Sema president, that she was elected to the Sergeant at Arms position on the South Bay Labor Council. For folks who aren't familiar with it, the South Bay Labor Council is a collection of unions here in the South Bay that is financially supported by its constituent unions and generally pushes pro-labor positions throughout the South Bay, and then additionally functions as kind of a first step kind of vetting process for political candidates who are interested in getting a labor endorsement in whatever their local election is. So it's a way for unions to have a more powerful voice by speaking together broadly, right? But it's also made up of quite a few unions, and therefore, folks within the SBLC will often have different priorities and different views on any given issue. CEMA hadn't previously had, before last year, representation on the executive board of SBLC. Dolores had actually run the year prior to that, and narrowly missed a seat through some chicanery at the time. Was elected last year to a non-named position on the executive board, and this year prevailed in the sergeant at arms position. So one, definitely helpful for CEMA to have an increased voice in the SBLC where our priorities are, and also just broadly good for county unions in general, right? To have that increased voice on there. So she's really done a spectacular job for CEMA, and really gotten us a stronger voice in that important body for us. Anything you want to add on to that, Ted?
No, I think you said it all. Just for people who don't know about the South Bay Labor Council and want to learn more about it, either attend our PAC meetings, which stands for Political Action Committee, so you can be more informed. We love the participation, or actually attend one of the South Bay Labor Council meetings. They always welcome anybody from the community to attend. When it comes times to vote, they'll kick you out.
Yep. Okay. Let me see. Last item we have on the agenda here is an update on the third rep. So it's been probably close on 6 months now since Rebecca resigned, took a position with Working Partnerships, right? Rebecca Armendariz was our third rep. And unfortunately now here we're 6 months out and we still haven't been able to fill that position. Unfortunately, we had an initial posting, which I don't think we got stellar candidates for at the time. And then after that posting and the candidates kind of lapsed, there were unfortunately some COVID related delays in getting it reposted for a second posting to try and get a good qualified candidate for the position. But it is reposted now. So just a reminder, we spoke about this before, but if anyone knows someone who they think would be a good fit for a CEMA rep position, this could apply to maybe someone who took, the VSIP, knows the county, can hit the ground running, is interested in coming back and working a little more, would be a great fit. Or if you know anybody who's got, union and labor experience, please feel free to send them our way. Actually have one member over at VMC that I think would be a good fit, kind of pushing him to apply. We'll see if he gets there. I think he'd be great though, and he's considering it. But yeah, definitely we want to get this position filled as soon as possible. The size of CEMA definitely necessitates having the three reps, and I know both Zeb and myself have been a little slammed since Rebecca left, so we're looking forward to getting that position filled. And then just as a reminder, we'll likely have some rejiggering of assignments when we get a third rep on, so we don't just give all the areas that Rebecca represented to the newest person. We don't want folks to get whiplash, feel like they're getting just always passed around to the most junior newest person there. So once we get somebody on, we'll kind of get a sense of where their strengths are, if they've worked previously, if they have healthcare experience, if they have public safety justice experience, if they've social work experience. We'll do some rejiggering there of your rep assignments, and then we'll let folks know. But yeah, please do ask around if you know anybody who'd be a good fit. Please send them our way. And with that, we got through the agenda. I noticed here I was getting some private questions over the course of this. I think folks need individual answers on. So when we do wrap up, if you had a question to me privately, I will get to it. If you stick around, I'll just have to answer a few of these.
Yeah, and two people directly messaged me. For those that did, I've added you to my WIP or work in progress, and I will respond to you in order. Right now, there's about 19 things on that. So 20 and 21 just got added for this meeting, but I will get to you in order. So don't worry about that. And then also to re-highlight what Adam mentioned about the third rep position, boy, would it be nice if there was someone who came in with some expert knowledge already of the county. Like that would really help so much. I know everyone says you can hit the ground running, but it really does make a difference, right? If you know some of the players, if you know some of the politics, and you kind of know that department head's been around for a long time, that department hasn't, we might need to explain things to them. I know backwards and forwards how VMC runs or how SSA runs or whatever. That kind of knowledge is wonderful. And in some cases, you're going to beat me and Adam out if you come in and you'll have deep knowledge of that department in a way that we just don't. So that's really great. If you're interested, or you know someone who's interested, like Adam said, who took this up, maybe you're interested in handling that. Remember, guys and gals, sorry, you can take your retirement if you're eligible. You can retire from the county and draw your retirement and then get a second salary. Lucky for you, you all out earn us for the most part. So that way you can get your pension and get our salary on top of it. So that might make sense for a couple of you. But if you do know anyone, please send them our way, and also shoot Adam or I an email and say, hey, I'm recommending so-and-so, or I'm applying, and here's why I think I'm a great fit, just so we can keep an eye out for your application. Thanks.
Great. Any final questions? I see we're at 1 o'clock here. Happy to address anything else before folks have to jump off. I see you turned your camera on there, Nicole. Get a question? No? Okay.
Got that parade wave, right?
Yeah. Usually just me and Zeb on camera. So.
Okay, well, I'm gonna head out. Adam, it sounds like you might have a few folks to deal with individually, but thanks everybody.
Great, thanks folks.